Welcome back to my channel. My name is Katharine, for those who don't know, and I'm going to be doing a reading wrap-up of August 2024. So let's get into it. I read 7 books this month, which is unheard of for me because I'm a very slow reader as it is, and I also have a full-time job. So it's not always easy for me to read, but because my work has been so slow, I've been able to read at work as well as after work. So it's been easy to read the amount of books that I have this month. I can't guarantee in future months that I will have read as many books as I did this month, but I will certainly try. I believe my Goodreads reading goal for this year was 24 books. So that's around 2 books per month, and I am slowly getting caught up to that because for a few months in the springtime, I just didn't read anything because I was in such a book slump. So I am now just getting back this month into reading. So hopefully in the upcoming months, I'll be able to read more. So the first book that I read, or I should say finished this month because I started it in the end of July, but then finished it in August, is One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I read, or I should say listened to, Daisy Jones and the Six by her on Audible. Audible is a audiobook app. This is not sponsored, by the way. I just have used them before if the audiobook isn't on Spotify. So I think I read Daisy Jones or listened to Daisy Jones and the Six about a year and a half ago, so I wanted to give another one of her books a try. I did like listening to Daisy Jones and the Six because it's more of an interview style book, so it almost felt like I was listening to an interview while listening to that book, if that makes sense. So I'm glad I listened to it rather than read it, and then I ended up watching the TV series on Amazon Prime Video, which was super cool to see. It almost felt like I was watching a real band on the screen, and even in the book it felt like I was listening to a real life interview of an actual band. It was taking place in the 70s, I believe, so it kind of reminded me of Fleetwood Mac because it was like a main female singer, and then an all-guy band. So that was really cool. So I definitely wanted to try out another one of her books. I think I rated Daisy Jones and the Six like a 3 or a 4 star. So it was kind of average, or maybe a little bit above average, just because of that real lifeness of the book, if that makes sense. It was not a 5 star for me, but I just wanted to try out another one of her books, and I gave this One True Loves by her a 4 star. I definitely enjoyed the book a lot. So essentially, in the synopsis on the back of the book, you can read this yourself, this is not a spoiler. This girl marries this guy. They move from Massachusetts to California, go to college out there, were dating during that time in college and end up getting married, like I said. And then he ends up in a helicopter crash, and he is presumed to be dead because they found the remains of like the 3 other guys that were in the helicopter, but they didn't find his remains, so they just thought that he was also dead. Lo and behold, his wife moves back home from California to Massachusetts, thinks that he's dead because that's what all the detectives and police are saying. So she moves on, 3 years goes by, and she ends up getting engaged to this other guy that she also went to high school with. So the husband, who is presumably dead in the helicopter crash she went to high school with, and then when she thinks that he's dead, she gets engaged to this other guy that she also went to high school with. And then as soon as they're about to get married, like they're maybe a few months out from getting married, and then her past husband, who was thought to have been dead, actually is alive. They found him stranded on some like strange island out in the Pacific. So it's just about her really navigating grief, and then also having to make a decision between, do I go back to my husband that I thought was dead, or do I go through with this marriage with this guy that I'm now engaged to? So I really enjoyed it. It definitely wasn't like a 5 star read for me. I don't know if I'd ever reread this though, just because of the nature of the book. It was like really sad. Even though there was somewhat of a happy ending, it just gave off really, really sad vibes, and I don't want to feel sad during books. So I don't think I'll reread this, but it's definitely something that I recommend to people if they want to get back into reading or have an easy read. It's definitely an easy read. I went through it really fast and it felt very light to read, even though it did handle very heavy subjects. I didn't know I was going to get through this as fast as I did. That's what I'm trying to say. But yeah, I do recommend this book to people. It was a 4-star for me, so definitely a little bit above average for me. The next book I read was Love and Gelato by Jenna Welch. I ended up giving this, I believe, like a 3 or a 3.5 star. I honestly don't remember. It's definitely a young adult book. It's about this high school girl whose mom dies of cancer. This is all on the back of the book, by the way. I'm never gonna spoil any of these books for you, just an FYI. You can all read this on the back of the book in the synopsis. So this girl's mom dies when she's in high school. She's 16 years old. She ends up moving to Italy with her dad, who she's never met before and she didn't even really know about. And it's just about her navigating grief again, just like One True Loves by Jenkins Reid. And then her mom ends up sending her a journal that was written by her when she was in Italy. So it's kind of cool to see the daughter who is trying to meet all the people and see all of the places that her mom wrote about in her journal while she was in Italy. But yeah, it definitely does not focus on the love aspect so much, or even the gelato aspect. I feel like it really centers around her grief and just trying to come to grips with her growing up. It's a really good coming of age story, and it's definitely more of a fluffier read than One True Loves, I have to say, because it is about a high schooler, and I would consider this young adult. I think it is actually young adult because it's about a high schooler. Like, why would a book not be young adult if it's about a high schooler? So it's definitely dealing with heavy subjects, but it obviously is more fluffy because it's catering to a younger audience. But I enjoyed it. It was like average for me. I would never read this again, but I would definitely recommend it to someone who is in the mood for like a summary type book, because it does talk a lot about Italy and like the landscape of Italy, and you definitely feel the Italian ambiance when you're reading this book. So I definitely recommend this if you're like in the mood for like a fluffy, light summer read. The third book that I read was Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover. This is the third Colleen Hoover book that I've read. I was really, really disappointed. I gave this a 2-star, and I see the reason why maybe someone would like this book. That's why I gave it a 2-star instead of a 1-star, but that's the only reason why I gave it a 2-star. I absolutely did not like this book. I did not enjoy it at all. I could see maybe someone liking it if it's like one of the first books that they're getting into reading wise, like say they haven't been a reader before, or they were a reader and this is their first book being back doing some reading, if that makes sense. But after having read so many books before, I just did not connect to this book whatsoever. Not the characters, not the plot, not anything. This is also on the back of the book in the synopsis. So essentially, it's about this girl who moves in with her brother, and across the hall is her brother's best friend, and they end up coming to an agreement that they're physically attracted to each other, but they're only gonna hook up. Like, they're not gonna have a relationship, they're just using each other for sex. And at first, of course, the female main character in this book agrees to it, but then she ends up gaining feelings for him, but he doesn't do the same. It just infuriated me because I feel like the female main character had like no self-respect, and then the guy was just so insufferable, like no personality whatsoever. And he also was just rude and mean to her. You end up finding out why he's so closed off and mean, and he doesn't really have any feelings for her, that still doesn't excuse the way that he acts. Like, I understand traumatic things happen. I've had traumatic things happen to me, but I'm not closed off to the world like he is. So it just baffles me that this character, even though he's not real, I understand that. I just don't understand how he could have been so blatantly mean and rude about things. It was just so odd to me. I personally just don't like reading books where the characters are so insufferable that I just don't like them whatsoever. I understand that characters have to be dynamic and you have to write characters that have flaws. Like, in real life, even me, we all have flaws, you know? So I understand that characters in books have to be flawed to an extent. Like, no one is perfect except for Jesus, okay? But to the same point, like, if I'm reading this book, I should at least enjoy reading about the characters and care about them to an extent. Do you know what I mean? I should be rooting for them. And I just simply wasn't rooting for them to be together. So the next 2 books that I read were on my Kindle, so let me pull those up. So the next book I read was Beach Read by Emily Henry. I have to explain this to you. So I also read another book by Emily Henry not too long ago. I would say about like 7 months ago, back in like January or even December of last year. And I read People We Meet on Vacation by her. I hated that book. I think I either gave that a 1 or a 2 stars. I ended up having to finish the book on Spotify on the audiobook version just because I was like begrudgingly, is that the word? Or trudging along through that book. I just simply did not like the characters. I didn't like the plot. It was so boring to me and so rom-com-ish, if that makes sense. I think that was the book I discovered that I don't like rom-coms, and that definitely felt like a rom-com to me. It just didn't have any depth to the characters, didn't have any depth to the plot. I decided to read Beach Read because I wanted to give her another chance. Everyone and their brother says that this is one of their favorite books of all time, if not their favorite book of all time. At least from Book Talk and BookTube and Bookstagram standards. I know quite a few people that I used to follow actually. I actually unfollowed them and unsubscribed after reading a few more books that they also recommended just because I felt like I couldn't trust them. But those types of people would always say that this is one of their favorite books or is their favorite book. And I read it just to give it another chance, to give her another chance, if that makes sense. I couldn't. I gave this a 2 star. No, wait, 2.5 star. Just because it was like slightly better in plot-wise to People We Meet on Vacation. It's just about this woman who is around my age, probably in her late 20s, and she is a writer. And her dad passes away, and she finds out that his dad was a cheater and he had this whole separate life, and he had this beach house on this lake in Michigan, I believe, and she ends up getting ownership of the house after he passes away. So she ends up moving to this beach house on this lake to basically wrap up some business at that house so that she could sell it, and then she ends up meeting this neighbor next door who ends up being one of her author nemesises. Is that even a word, nemesises? Anyway, he's a nemesis of hers, okay, ever since college. They went to college together. It's just about them basically coming to an agreement of writing each other's opposite genres. Like, he's more of a literary fiction dude, and she's more of a romance writer, so they end up switching genres to write because they're both kind of stuck on writing, and then they kind of are in a race to see who publishes a book first. And then of course they, you know, develop some sort of feelings for each other. I'm not gonna go too deep into that because then I would be giving stuff away, but like essentially the characters were just like very gray to me. They didn't exude any sort of personality. It almost felt like they were just two-dimensional characters. I feel like Emily Henry was just trying too hard to give them a personality without actually giving them a personality, if that makes sense. A lot of the things that they would say or do were super cringy, or like it almost seemed like the characters were trying too hard to have a personality. Like, I feel like that was the case even in people we meet on vacation. I feel like Emily Henry is just trying too hard. She's a try-hard. Is that a term? I think I've heard that before. She's a try-hard. Emily is a try-hard, hence why her characters are try-hards in having personalities. It's the same with the plot too. I feel like the plot was just not giving. Like, it sounds like a cool concept, but at the same time, like, it was just so two-dimensional. Like, you wouldn't understand what I'm talking about until you read it, but I gave this a 2.5 star. And I don't recommend it to anyone, really, unless you're looking for something that is just like an easy read. But to be honest, it wasn't even easy for me to get through, okay? And I'm usually the one who's like, oh, like fluffiness all around. But yeah, I take that back. I would not recommend this book. The next book that I read on my Kindle was Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren. Another 2 stars for me. I don't know how to describe this book other than it's about these high schoolers, and this girl loses her mom at a young age, and she ends up with her dad getting this house that they visit on the weekends or during the summers. And when they're at this other house, she befriends a neighbor of hers and they end up falling in love. And then it kind of switches timelines where it's like in the past when they were in high school, and then to the present day where she's like in her late 20s and she starts talking to this kid again after 11 years of not talking to him. And you don't know why she stopped talking to him until like the very end of the book, and I'm not gonna spoil that for you. But essentially it's a very odd story of these high schoolers falling in love and then not talking for essentially a decade. And I just felt very odd reading about certain aspects of the book, especially them being in high school. Even with Love and Gelato, when I read that and them being high schoolers, certain things when I was reading it, I'm like, I really feel like a pedophile reading this about high schoolers right now. Because when they're describing certain scenarios, you might know what I'm talking about, when they are being all lovey and dovey, I feel super awkward as a 28-year-old reading about that, about teenagers. I have nieces and nephews who are in high school and who are teenagers, okay? I was a young auntie, and I just feel like I'm reading about my nieces and nephews having a love life. And it just grosses me out because I don't want to think about that. And I felt really wrong reading scenes, specifically in this book, even in Love and Gelato too, but specifically this one, it was a little bit more graphic. And I'm like, why are they putting scenes like this into a book about high schoolers? And I should also mention that I was giving Christina Lauren another chance because I did read The Unhoneymooners, and that was a 2-star. I initially found out about that book on TikTok. It was actually the first book I discovered on Book Talk, to be honest. And the reason why I picked that book up is because the way that the girl was describing it on the video, she was almost describing the synopsis of the book as if it was her own life. And then at the end of the video, she was like, haha, just kidding. This is actually the synopsis of The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. And granted, like, when she described it that way, I was like, I'm picking that book up immediately. So I ended up reading it, and I was just so disappointed. Like, the plot of The Unhoneymooners in retrospect seems really interesting, but then when I started reading it and getting into like the meat of the book, I was like, there's no depth to this book. It's all so two-dimensional. It's so 2D. I need 3D, okay? But yeah, I decided to give Love and Other Words a chance because it's also by Christina Lauren, and I was sorely disappointed. So like I just mentioned, I felt super awkward reading those types of scenes between high schoolers. And then another thing that really bothered me was, much like Ugly Love with the female main character in that book, in Love and Other Words, the female main character in this one, she also like had no self-respect. She didn't know how to make a decision. I understand that when she was in high school, like, I guess you're all confused and stuff, but like when I was in high school, like, I no, I was pretty much confused going through those 4 years of my life, but like not that confused. Like she couldn't make up her mind whether or not she wanted to be in a relationship with this dude. Like you say you love him, but then you're like, no, just kidding. And then the guy, the main male character in this book, was also very much like the guy main character in Ugly Love as well. He was just so insufferable. He would say really mean things to her and just make her feel super demeaned and almost like talking down to her. And I just did not like that. He was super insufferable. Also didn't really have much of a personality other than that he was super smart. And then the ending to this book, I'm like, okay, like you didn't talk to him for 11 years for that reason. Like I understand it was a traumatic experience. It doesn't warrant you not talking to him for 11 years. Do you know what I mean? It was just really weird, and I just didn't enjoy the book as much as everyone else does. It was just so bad. The only person I would really recommend this book to is maybe someone who's in high school or college, because I feel like at that point you're almost reading about people who are your own age in high school or in the teenager phase. But as someone who's 28 years old and is far older than high schoolers, I felt awkward reading about them. So the only person I would maybe suggest reading this is someone who's in high school or college. But even with that, like the plot just was not good whatsoever. But yeah, this was just like a no for me. With this next book, I hated this book actually, and y'all are gonna be disappointed in me because some people think that this is their favorite book, and it simply was one of my least favorite books of all time, and that is Normal People by Sally Rooney. I gave this 1 star because, for one, the characters were super boring, even more boring than the people in Ugly Love and Love in Other Words and in Beach Read, okay? They had no personality whatsoever. So basically the whole book is a literary fiction. It's about these 2 characters who met in high school, they hooked up but never got into a relationship. They end up going to the same college together because they care about each other. Still don't get into a relationship and still hook up. And then it just like goes on and on and on about their life. And what really brought it down to a 1 star for me, this isn't a spoiler by the way, it was a solid 2 stars for the whole entire book. And then what really brought it down to that 1 star rating is at the almost 80% mark, they go to a Gaza rally, okay? For those who know me, I am in support of Israel. I do not support Palestine whatsoever. Anyone who associates themselves with Palestine is aligning themselves up with terrorism. Hamas is an internationally recognized terrorist group, and if you align with Palestine, you align with terrorism because Hamas is the elected power in Palestine. The people of Palestine made them powerful in that nation, and they are the governing group of Palestine. And they were elected in, they were voted in by the people of Palestine. So I just do not agree with Gaza and the support of the Palestinians whatsoever. Secondly, they kept on talking about like abortion and how anti-abortion people, so people who are pro-life, are like some evil people who are not for a woman's rights or a woman's health, which is quite the opposite. I am pro-life, by the way, so I just didn't like how they were demonizing people who are pro-life. So that brought it down to a 1 star. So the next book doesn't have a dust jacket, but it's The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager, and I really enjoyed this book. It came out to be a 3 star for me just because the start of it was super slow and it ended up not really being like a thriller for me. It almost felt like a mystery because this woman essentially watches this house across the lake from her, hence the title of it called The House Across the Lake. And she watches this house and she sees some really weird stuff go on, and then it's almost like a whodunit, like she's trying to figure out like what's going on at the house and so forth. So it just did not hit a chord with me in terms of like a thriller, because I was super in the mood for a thriller. Like I probably would have gave this a 4 if it was maybe marketed more as like a mystery or like a whodunit, but it was marketed as a thriller and I just didn't see it being a thriller. Like there were definitely some like head-turning moments, but like It wasn't like a thriller, if that makes sense. The plot also seemed really choppy to me. The beginning of the book, like the first half, it was super slow. Seemed like just like a setup for the rest of the book, but like now looking back on it, like that setup didn't really like make sense too much, because like why would they give so much detail or unnecessary detail when it wasn't going to be utilized like in the rest of the book. And then it just seemed like really choppy after that. Like it seemed like they went to one thing and then they went to a completely other thing and then they went to a completely other thing. Like it definitely had some head turning moments, like I said before, but it was not like as smooth as I thought it was going to be. But yeah, those are the 7 books that I read this month. Just to recap, I read One True Loves by Jenkins Reid. I then read Love and Gelato by Jenna Welch. Third, I read Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover. Fourth, I read Beach Read by Emily Henry. Fifth, I read Love and Other Words by Christina. Sixth, I read Normal People by Sally Rooney. And then 7th, I read The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. It was just not like the best reading month for me, as you could have seen. Most of the books that I read were like 2 or 3 stars. The only 4-star book that was in this was One True Loves, which was a 4-star. And that was probably my favorite book out of this month. But I hope you enjoyed this reading wrap up. I liked filming it, I liked reading this month, and hopefully you can tune into my next monthly reading wrap up. Okay, bye!